Okay, so if you're working with securitization vehicles in Luxembourg, you probably know two things. One, the opportunities are massive. And two, BCL reporting can be an absolute nightmare. So today, we're going to break down what makes this mandatory reporting so tough and, most importantly, how to actually get it right.
Yeah, feeling totally overwhelmed by this process is pretty much normal. It's honestly one of the most detailed and demanding requirements out there, and the pressure to be perfect is really on. So let's pull back the curtain and see what we're actually dealing with.
First things first, who actually has to do this? Well, the BCL picks a sample of vehicles with a very specific goal. They want to cover at least 95% of the sector's total assets. So if you get that notification, it's not optional. You are now officially on the hook for some very regular and very, very detailed reports.
So what exactly are we filing? It really boils down to three main reports that all have to talk to each other. You've got two quarterly ones, the S214, which is kind of your big picture balance sheet, and the S215, which covers all your transactions. But the real monster here is the TPT TBS. That's a security by security breakdown that's due every single month. And you guessed it, making sure that monthly detail adds up perfectly to your quarterly summary, that's where things get really fun.
And you don't get a lot of time to pull all this together. The deadline for every single report is just 20 working days after the period ends. That is not a lot of breathing room to gather your data, hunt for errors, and fix everything before you have to hit submit.
Now, you might think the hardest part is getting the numbers right inside the report, but honestly, the very first hurdle is just getting the file accepted. Before the BCL even looks at your data, you have to nail the technical side of things, and that all starts with their transmission rules.
Right, so forget about just uploading a simple spreadsheet. Nope, every report has to be in a very specific XML format. And as if that wasn't enough, the file name itself is like a complex puzzle, governed by this incredibly strict naming convention.
Yeah, think of the file name less like a name and more like a secret password that has to be absolutely perfect. It's built from 7 different parts. You've got the report code, the period, unique IDs for both the reporter and the declarant, all the way down to a sequence number in case you submit more than once in a day. Get any single one of these wrong, and the system just rejects it flat out.
And here's what that looks like in the wild.
I mean, look at that. It's a long, completely unforgiving string of characters. A single misplaced underscore or one wrong digit in that ID means instant rejection. This whole process feels like it was practically designed to cause manual errors.
So let's say you've actually managed to conquer the file name and the XML format. Awesome. Congratulations. You've just unlocked the next level, the data itself. Now your numbers have to survive a whole gauntlet of automated checks designed to make sure everything is perfect.
And the BCL is not messing around when they talk about why this is so important. I mean, this quote from their own documentation says it all. This isn't just about ticking some administrative box. This data gets fed into critical Eurozone economic models, so the quality of your data is directly tied to the reputation of Luxembourg's entire financial center. The pressure is huge.
So how do they enforce this high quality? Through something they call verification rules. You can think of these as a series of automated tripwires. The BCL system scans every piece of your data to make sure it's logical, it's consistent within the report itself, and it lines up with the data from your other reports.
Now, these rules aren't all the same. They really fall into two different buckets. First, you've got the permanent rules. These are the hard-coded, fundamental checks, like making sure your assets equal your liabilities. The BCL basically expects your software to handle these. But then you have the temporary rules, which are way more nuanced, they can change over time, and they are aimed directly at the people, us, preparing the report.
Let's look at some real-world examples to see how deep this goes. Of course, you have the basics, like assets must equal liabilities. But it gets so much trickier. The totals in your quarterly S214 report, they have to perfectly match the sum of all the individual securities in your monthly TPT TBS report. There are also these super specific rules, like you can only use no breakdown codes on certain lines. And there's even conditional logic, like you can only use the state government sector code for countries that, actually have a federal government. Trying to check all of this manually is, well, it's a massive job.
Okay, so we've got these crazy complex file formats and a minefield of data validation rules. It's really easy to feel like you're just being set up to fail. But the good news is, you don't have to walk through this maze by yourself. There is a structured path to getting this right. And that's really the heart of the problem, isn't it? With dozens of ways to mess up and all this pressure to get it right, how can you possibly guarantee a perfect submission?
Not just once, but every single month and every single quarter without fail.
The answer isn't about working harder, it's about working smarter. Instead of trying to manually fight all this complexity, the real solution is to use technology, to use specialized tools that were built from the ground up to handle this technical stuff for you.
So to make this really concrete, let's look at a practical example of a tool like this, the Excel-based templates from FundXP. They are specifically designed to tackle BCL securitization reporting head-on.
So let's see how a tool like this actually solves the exact problems we've been talking about. That impossible file name, it's generated for you, automatically. The risk of using a wrong country code? Gone, because you get drop-down lists with only the valid options. Those super complex verification rules, the system checks them in real time and flags errors as you type. And finally, that whole XML conversion thing, that happens with a single click.
Okay, let's take one of those really specific rules. The BCL says that the currency code XXX, which means no breakdown, is only allowed for certain items on the balance sheet. If you're doing this manually, that is such an easy rule to forget and get wrong. And here's how a smart tool solves it. Instead of you having to memorize the rule book, the template just stops the error from ever happening. The currency drop-down menu is dynamic, which means it only shows you options that are valid for that specific line item you're working on. The mistake literally becomes impossible to make. How cool is that?
This just completely transforms your entire workflow. It becomes this simple 4-step process. You pop in your data, the template instantly highlights any issues based on the BCL rules, you fix them right then and there, you generate the perfect XML file with one click, and you submit it. Your focus shifts away from technical compliance and back to making sure your source data is accurate in the first place.
All right, let's wrap this all up. BCL reporting is a maze of super strict rules for both file formatting and data validation. The stakes are incredibly high. It affects your firm and even Luxembourg's reputation. And really, the only way to consistently nail it is to automate the technical headaches. Using the right tool lets your job go back to what it should be, ensuring the quality of the financial data itself, not being a technical compliance expert.
You know, this whole process brings up a much bigger question. BCL reporting is really just one example of what's happening globally. As financial regulations everywhere get more complex and more data-driven, is intelligent automation still just a nice-to-have, or has it become the absolute fundamental baseline for even surviving in the world of compliance?